Welcome everybody to another Legal Tech Talks. My name is Frances Anderson, I'm the MD of Netlaw Media, and it's actually a true pleasure to have you all with us today. So today I'm delighted to introduce this session as it's now our 52nd virtual event, and it's actually a really insightful one with a formidable panel which I'm delighted to have with us today, which our chair, Heather, will introduce, and it's going to be looking at data privacy and the evolution of client phishing attacks. Now, before I outline or go into the session a bit more, let me go through the housekeeping first, and I'll introduce our chair, and then we will move on to the session itself. So before I hand over, as I said, as it's a virtual event, you'll be able to join in live. So do put up your hand. You'll see that if you right mouse click it, you'll be able to put your hand up. We'll then bring you in live and you'll be able to ask your question or put your question through chat below, or if you put it into the actual Q&A, and then our panel can even join in with you and sort of answer your questions directly as well. So to give you an idea, Heather Anson is our chair today, and it's we've worked with her for many years. She's actually the managing director of Anson Evaluate, a company specialising in compliance and law tech. She's also a specialist consultant with Digital Law UK. Now, I'm delighted, as I said, to have her. So Heather, I'm going to pass it over to you to introduce the session more, if you can, and also introduce our guests.
Certainly. Well, thank you very much, Frances, for having me back. I always enjoy working with Netlaw Media people. Yeah, so what we're going to be talking about today is what I've been talking to a lot of law firms about, and all of our panel have been talking about, and a lot of law firms themselves have been talking about, which is data privacy, client phishing attacks in particular. We've done entire seminars solely on this, and this is what we're going to focus a lot on today, because it is probably the biggest, if not the primary way that law firms are attacked. We have an excellent panel, as Frances mentioned, so I will probably just now leave it to them to introduce themselves so that we can get on with this. And the first one up is FC, also known as Freaky Clown. I also like to refer to him as the Banksy of ethical hacking. FC?
Thank you, Heather. So my name is FC. I am the co-founder and co-CEO of Sygenta, a cybersecurity consultancy. I am an ethical hacker. I legally break into places for a living and then tell you how I did that. And I've been doing that for about 3 decades now.
Excellent. So scary but good is what you do, which is excellent. Next up, an excellent expert we have with us today is Professor Lillian Edwards. Lillian, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Professor of Law, Innovation and Society at Newcastle University, which is a fancy way for saying I'm a technology law professor. And I cover a lot of fields, but most recently, mostly privacy, data protection, AI, and cybersecurity. And I've been doing a lot of work on deep fakes on and off for the last maybe 3 years.
Excellent. We look forward to hearing more about that later on. And last but not least, obviously, is Jack Chapman, who works with Egress.
Hi everyone, it's great to be here today. My name is Jack Chapman, I'm the VP of Threat Intelligence, and it's my job to understand what the criminal ecosystem is doing and how they're targeting organizations like yours.
Excellent. Thank you guys so much for your introductions. And I just want to remind everyone who's watching this that if you have any questions as we're going along, please feel free to either raise your hand or type them in on the question box, and we will fit them in as much as we can. If you'd like, we will also have question and answers at the end if we have time. With that, let's start with our first question, which I'm going to ask Jack to start with, but it is 2020 lessons and key challenges for law firms and employees. Can you give us some insight onto that, Jack?
I think unfortunately attackers continue to sort of evolve how they're attacking organizations. If I sort of take out sort of, for me, 3 highlights from this, I'd highlight the fact that ransomware attacks continue to evolve through crime as a service. It's essentially easier than ever before to get quite sophisticated payloads and then weaponize that to deliver into firms. I think the other really interesting trends in terms of what we need to be aware of is sort of the rise of supply chain compromises, especially on the email phishing, social engineering side, where rather than targeting a firm directly, they might target a client first and then use that to target the firm therefore it comes from a legitimate account. And I think the last thing is linked to sort of data breaches. In sort of the world of information that we live in, there's so much of our personal but also business information out there that criminals can go and scrape and use to tailor attacks to make them more credible and more effective.
Okay, could you give us a little bit more information? I know we hear a lot about supply chain attacks, and I know that the term supply chain can be used in many different ways. So can you give us maybe some examples of what you mean by a supply chain attack?
Absolutely. So a key thing with supply chain from a risk point of view is understanding who's in your supply chain, the definition of it. And for us, it's essentially anyone you talk to on a regular basis. So that could be everything from one of your customers through to one of your suppliers. So it could be, for instance, the printer repair shop that manages your IT infrastructure. I know FC would love to imitate to get into your business. Or on the other end, it could be someone imitating your prime client who are pretending to be very angry with you in order to create an emotive response to your share information up front. And by compromising them, what I mean by that, and there's a range of this and there's different definitions, it's everything from I've got their username and password and I've logged into their email account in order to attack you. But then some people call it the same piece of if they've just directly spoofed them, they're just pretending to be them. But I know for us, if they fully compromised it, that means all of the security passes, they've got access to the crown jewels. Okay.
And since we're talking about trends over the last couple of years and into 2022, can yourself or any of our other panelists tell us how much do you think has there been an increase in this type of attack, particularly aimed at law firms? And maybe this is FC or Jack.
Yeah, so we have seen a massive rise in ransomware attacks like this and this phishing attack because it is so easy to do. We've given many demonstrations, including at Netlaw Media, of how to do this type of phishing attack, how easy it is to create these phishing emails and infiltrate companies and get within their network beyond all their firewalls, beyond all their technical capabilities. So yeah, it's really ramped up recently, mostly since the last sort of 10 years or so, but in the last couple of years, it's really taken off.
Okay, and what types of specific phishing attacks? I know ransomware is often a result of a lot of the phishing attacks, but what do they look like up front? Why is it so easy for law firms to fall prey to these?
Well, it's not just law firms, really. It's everyone is more susceptible to these because they're taking advantage of lots of psychological triggers, as Jack said. There's the emotive response, there's a time pressure response. These all feed into our innate abilities as a human to cope with stuff, right? So if you start to trigger those, then we start to do things that we probably shouldn't do, and that sort of really ties back into the social engineering arm of what I do and my history of it. It's very simple to create these triggers within an email. So I think it's just we're overworked, we're overstressed, we're doing too much. You kind of expect people to be clicking on links, and we kind of think that there might be a technical fix to everything, but in this case, it is literally, it's probably going to happen at some point, and you just have to mitigate what happens at the other end.
Okay, and I hear a lot from clients. They say, well, these phishing attacks, these emails and text messages and things, they're just really easy to spot. They'll have spelling mistakes in them, or they'll, the English will be off.
Yeah.
How easy is it to spot these?
Well, okay, so there's a couple of sides to this. The first thing is the reason they put in these spelling mistakes and this bad English and the grammar, basically how I normally write an email, is because they're trying to sort of find where the level is, right? So because of if people spot them at that point, they're not the ones that are going to fall for the scam later on. So the ones that get past that point, that's kind of like the barrier to entry almost. Like, so if you kind of don't spot all of the obvious stuff, then you're more likely to fall for the stuff later on. So that's really why they're doing that. And so, yes, you can spot these, but in the heat of the moment, you might not spot everything. And some of the ones are really, really sophisticated. And like Jack says, if someone's compromised an actual account and has access to their previous emails, they can start to write things that really match really well with who they are, or who they're pretending to be rather, and what they're trying to do.
Okay. Well, since we're on you, and we might as well, this is going into our next two questions, really, what we've talked about. So can you talk to us about spoof proofing?
Yeah, it's one of these things, right, with a lot of security issues, is we're never going to fix it all the time everywhere, right? No matter what someone says, we can fix this with a blinking box with some lights on. Honestly, trust us, Gov, pay us a couple of grand a month, you're sorted. It's not always going to fix everything. It may cut down a lot of stuff, but with advanced persistent threats, so in the type of roles that I used to be involved in, you would always get in, right? So as I said, I've been doing cybersecurity now for 30 years. I've broken into thousands and thousands of places, government and military as well, and I always get in, 100% success rate. And it's not because I'm like awesome, it's because there is always a way in. There's always a way to get what you want. It's just you have to make that as hard as possible for everyone that is attacking you. So it's layers of security, layers of segmentation, layers of different things, because you cannot always rely on the technology or even the human. It has to be a combination of everything all at once.
Okay. Either Jack or Lillian, would you like to add to this? Ways that you believe that we can spoof proof or reduce the actual spoofing, because as you said, it's often a when, not if.
I think FC raised a really good point there, and it's not relying on, if you think, when we talk about cybersecurity, there's the three traditional pillars. You've got your technology, your people, and your policy around that. And I think going forward, quite often we've looked at those pillars in isolation of what do we have for our people, what do we have for our technology. I think as we're moving forward into sort of trying to prevent these spoofs, these more sophisticated attacks, it's how do those all layer together and not viewing them in isolation. And I think that's both a fantastic opportunity, but not just for improved detection, but also a bit of reflection. And as FC says, a persistent attacker will continue to work through those layers. And when we talk about security, we quite often think of stopping attackers getting in, and there's the other side. How do you spot someone attempting to get in? How do you use that intelligence to bolster your attacks? And how fast can you react to someone targeting you?
Okay. And what can we look at in terms of the inevitable, if they do get in, what mitigating factors can we have in place? How can we stop the leak, as it were? How can we fix it once it's happened?
So for me, it's all about time to respond. So the faster you can get on top of something, the less potential attackers moved horizontally or vertically within an organization. That leads to what policies do you have in place so that if they do get an entry point, how can you essentially tie that down so they can't just instantly access your whole organization's SharePoint, for instance, from one account. It's sort of the needs access methodology. And that it's about essentially your security teams having alerts and almost going towards that more automated approach. If for your security team, you have 100,000 alerts that each analyst has to look at every day, that's too much noise. They're not going to be able to actively and be proactively evaluating the threats that they're facing. So I think it's, again, combining that technology with that policy layer of essentially what do we really care about? Where are our crown jewels? But also understanding that you need to protect everything else as well and having a layered proportional response.
Okay. And I see Lillian here nodding your head quite vigorously. What would you like to add?
I was just going to say, for the benefit of law firms, that my experience is in the university sector, and we have been laid low by ransomware lately with some huge, very, very bad stories. So you would think that was a community of relatively intelligent people, and we've been taken to town. So I wouldn't feel so bad about it. I mean, the other thing I'd say, and this is purely as a punter, really, rather than this is not my end of expertise, is what the universities then did, of course, was they put in two-factor authentication. They mostly put in Microsoft Authenticator throughout, and that's caused enormous problems as well. So I think you need to check out if your legacy systems and your mobiles and so forth will play nice with this, you know, because almost the cure has been worse than the illness. And the other point I'd make is I think a lot of it's about your social media policies. Because what I've observed as someone who's dabbled in looking at phishing over the years is that these people respond incredibly quickly to current events. And what I'd expect to be seeing right now is an absolute, waterfall of emails referring to Ukraine. Charity appeals, sponsorship. Do you want to take a refugee? Click here, or give us these details or whatever, and they're very, 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 very quick at this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen much of that on my at least 2 work networks. And so I assume that their spam policies are working quite well, so that's something to check up on perhaps.
Good. Yeah. Spam filters can be great. Ours are very vigorous on my email, especially, which means I have to check my spam folder quite often, because a lot of people end up in there. Like, I apologize, we're just aggressive. Now, you mentioned the headache sometimes that this causes, and there are law firms that don't have their own in-house IT that can take care of this, and it can become very stressful to think about, well, I'm not an IT expert, how can I do this? And is there a way, and any of you can contribute to this, where they can sort of start simple? Where can they start so that they don't feel overwhelmed? What is the best way to approach this if you're a technophobe, as it were?
So the first thing that I would say, before you even get into all the technicalities of what you're trying to do, how you're trying to protect it, is understand what your crown jewels are. Jack's mentioned this several times. What are the crown jewels? And this is one of the key questions that we ask any new clients, like what is the crown jewel that is really vital, that you must sort of really look after? And the answers we get is generally wrong. People misunderstand what we mean by that. So understanding what are the key things that if they were to go missing, right, would absolutely destroy your company, right? So if you looked as an insider at your company and said, what are the minimum things that I would need to do to destroy this company from inside out? That's what you should be protecting, because it may not be what you think or what your directors or what the board are saying are the crown jewels, because they can be very different. So first off, figure out what are your crown jewels, first of all. Okay.
And I think a lot of people might think of the financial account information or our money. And in data is the new is the new gold, really, these days. So when you're looking at crown jewels, I think in law firms particularly, data is your crown jewels. And what type of data? Well, your client's data, their financial information, embarrassing information. I think about the Panama Papers and the other ones that have come back. So let's see, we had a question just come in. It says, are you familiar with AI software to undertake penetration testing at will? And what are your views on this type of software? Actually, FC, since we got you up, this might be a good one for you.
Right. So there are very varying difference of pen testers, right? So an AI, I have yet to see a really good AI anything, right? They're generally just programmed if-then statements that show me a really good AI system and I'll be impressed. But there aren't very many. There are very few doing pen tests well. There are very few humans that are doing pen tests very well. Sure. So let alone automate. You can automate a lot of the tools. We build a lot of our own tool chains here to help us do more coverage rather than depth. I'm not worried about AI pen testing taking over at any time soon. There's a lot of, we provide like managed vulnerability analysis, so it's all kind of automated and much cheaper than a normal pen test. But an AI system doing pen tests is never going to work very well.
If I just jump on the bandwagon there, because I can't pass off. Whenever I hear AI and security products, the first question for me, for any vendor, this is coming from a vendor, so feel free to challenge me on this completely, is what is the AI? And if anyone just says it's a magic black box that will solve all of your issues, run away. Yeah. Because the whole point of it, 95% of things that we call AI used to be called statistics or automation or anything else. So really, regardless of how some software achieves something, it's the outcome that really matters. We've got this penetration testing software that automatically do these 100 steps. That's what matters. So I'd advise caution when it comes to things sort of AI, blockchain, crypto resistance, quantum. it's one of the things that unfortunately seems to be getting worse in the cyberspace is this buzzword bingo. So I just thought I'd want to add to that, just add slight caution and a bit of skepticism for anyone who throws these around too freely.
Right, and I think there's a big distinction that's being muddied recently between AI and automation. I think FC, you brought that in. Automating things, great. With smart contracts, that's an automation of some. I always say smart contracts. They're not smart. They're not a contract, but they're an excellent automation form. So let's see. We have a question. MS is moving heavily into defense. How do you rate MS Defender in comparison to other types of cybersecurity? Anyone want to come in on MS Defender? Or
I speak to that because it's sort of we sit alongside that quite often in the phishing space.
Okay.
I think MS Defender in sort of the spam space is very good. Like compared to what we faced in the 90s with spam, it's come an amazingly long way. In terms of sort of ransomware and file attachment, it's pretty good. However, we see vast majority of sort of essentially credential scraping get through, and a lot of that's coming from the supply chain compromise. I think we sort of see a 30% bypass rate of that particular solution. But it really depends on what you're trying to achieve with it from both a compliance point of view, but also a security. As FC correctly stated earlier, no one tool is a complete sort of salvation for any security sort of policy or implementation. So it's really how you use these tools in conjunction with others.
So, and I think one of the things you just said is rather important, and maybe FC can follow up on this, is that the avoidance of that. So the technology you put in place where the people that we've talked about actively avoid the measure you've put in place to defend because it is either too clunky or doesn't work right, or it's just they just don't want to deal with it. Do we see that? Is that one way that hackers try and get in, FC?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that you do when you're attacking anywhere is, you look at the tech stack that's available to that company, and you do that via sort of intelligence gathering, and you work out how you're going to get past these things. But a lot of systems like this, and I don't want to scare everyone in this, right? But most of the systems, they will have a way around, right? It's just how long and how much effort does an attacker want to put into getting into your company? So yes, MS Defender is actually really good, right? When you compare it to some of the free other sort of systems out there, then it's up there in the top sort of 5. Would I rely on just that? No, never. I would never rely on just one thing. It's always about layers of defense.
Right.
I think I'd just add the last thing for MS Defender, and this is almost an unfortunate thing for Microsoft's great success in their business model, is that they're the number one target. If an attacker can't get past Microsoft, they're going to struggle to earn their living.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the supply chain. And since Microsoft has sort of dominated the market in supply chain for a lot of these things, they can be quite a target for us. I just have one other thing to ask in this question, because it ties into a recent ICO decision. It's the first major law firm fine. So we always think of the loss that's happened, or something that a hacker comes in and will have loss of information or money or things like that. But this was a law firm that was fined £98,000, so nearly £100,000, for failing to have rigorous enough defense in place. And the ICO looked at the fact that this company this law firm had tried to do the UK's cybersecurity protocols, and they hadn't passed that, and they a year later still hadn't done anything, including not putting in place simple things like two-factor identification. So what are the panel's views in terms of looking to government standards, particularly the one that's in place right now, as far as saying, well, if we do that, then we're good? And I know there are opinions out there, so feel free.
Well, can I preface that with, before we get into that whole discussion, they only got fined 98 grand. I've lost more than that in lawyer fees over the years. Like that's a pittance
That
of a
was-
fine.
yeah.
And what is the point of having these baselines that we must hit when it's going to cost you more than that to put in these baselines anyway? People are just going to be like, well, what's the point? The fine is useless. I'll just pay that and just not bother.
Well,
I
was
think it's
going to.
actually an equivalent to the size of the firm and their budget. So it may not look like a big fine, but proportionally to what it meant to them, that a small portion of that could have been spent to fix the problem. I'm not trying to defend the ICO, but anyway, Cyber Essentials was their mark. Okay, Lillian, sorry I interrupted.
Yeah, I was going to add this before, actually, that for law firms, they are a little bit unlike other companies, or at least, most other companies, in that the reputational loss from this kind of fine will be vast. In fact, I would have thought if you were a small firm, it could easily see you off, really, because these things get round and people will go, if they can't keep my customer data safe, then I'm not going there, right? But it is a tiny fine. And yeah, I think the fear of huge fines in the legal sector is probably going to take a while, because the ICO is not being, the ICO is business friendly, is the phrase that is usually used. They will negotiate with you. They will talk to you about how you could have done it better, all these kind of things, long before they get to the stage of a fine. So I'm actually quite curious, how much that firm didn't do to get to that stage, right? You have to really work quite hard to be fined by the ICO.
Yes,
I think
I should preface that with the fact that the commissioner has just changed, and there is a bit more, the individual who's now the commissioner is a bit more aggressive. We may see that change.
Yeah, well, I hope so, actually. Sorry, law firms.
I think the issue there is actually they've got it completely backwards, as with a lot of stuff when we're trying to change behaviors, which is what we're trying to do there, is they're using a stick, and you should be using a carrot, some incentivization. Like, if you do this, then you get a tax break. You'll be amazed at how many people will do that, rather than be worried about a fine that may or may not come. Like you say, it's really hard to get fined by the ICO unless you're really trying.
Yeah, I think it's enough of an incentive to be working with a regulator who's much, much, much keener on working with you to improve your behavior than it is on fining you. I think that already is a carrot-based approach, really.
Yeah. Okay, I have one last question. I think this from Paul. This is, I believe, aimed at FC. It says, I'm told that many hacks occur by what is known as a drive-by, essentially seeking easy hacks where the basic levels of protection are not in place. So as a hacker, what are the layers that need to be in place to protect a business and to deter you from even attempting to hack that firm? How far does the business need to go to protect its data? And I've always used that as a net. So there's something called spear phishing, which is a very targeted one, but then I call this a wide net approach.
Yeah. So yeah, there are multitudes of ways attackers go against certain companies. So you've got the APT threat, which is a very targeted, kind of like the spear phishing, one particular group going after one particular company for a specific reason. Then you have the just spread, right? So you just scan the entire internet, right? So that doesn't take very long with modern computers and modern setups. You can scan everything really quickly. So if you find a new flaw or a new flaw gets discussed, then you can very quickly discover who else has that flaw. And then you've got the collateral damage piece. So that is where a nation state group may be going after a very specific company, but that company that sort of leaks out, right? It's kind of like old warfare, right? We used to drop bombs on people and they would hit innocent people. Now it's much more targeted. So, it goes through someone's kitchen in Ukraine instead of blowing up a school. It's the same with cyber weapons, right? And I use that term very loosely. I used to develop them, so I can get away with it. They are not target specific. They do leak out. They do cause collateral damage. So really, depending on where you are, you have to have different layers of defense in there. So what are the bare minimums you can do is at least segment your network, right? So if anything does get through, it can't spread throughout that network very quickly. It's one of the things that really trips me up when I'm doing a test is, can I get from here to here? Well, can I get from sort of the web dev team to the finance team? That should not be able to be done. So that segmentation is it's the bare minimum that you should really be doing.
Okay, partitioning. And two-factor identification, is that one of those layers, or is that sort of not even a layer that should be?
You should put it in. Multi-factor authentication is good. There's always a way around things, but it's better than nothing. And again, we should be incentivizing the use of that.
It's interesting, actually. I've just looked up the ICO penalty notice in that case, and the two factors that are cited are A, that it took them 2 years to apply a patch, which does seem pretty bad. And the second is that they didn't put on multi-factor authentication. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah, and that seems to be a basic one these days. Okay, we're going to move to sort of a different question, or actually different topic. Which is new hybrid working. We've got a lot more work from home part-time, work in the office part-time, or both. And we wanted to talk about the balancing those risks and the fact that we're having to, in some senses, it may be in a good way, empower employees more in this sort of cyber protection realm. And Jack, do you want to start us off on this topic?
Yeah, blimey, 2 years ago, no one would sort of bet that we'd be working this way with sort of hybrid working, people sort of more flexible, more ownership of their IT. They're not in the office where the old traditional sort of iron wall approach where I can call IT at any time to come and help me, where now it's all remote. And this is both interesting from a sort of productivity, helping employees, but obviously as cyber professionals, there are a lot of risks here. For me to give obviously that isolation piece, especially social engineering attacks where people are isolated, it's easier to confuse them. But the big one for me that's quite rarely talked about is as sort of people's personal lives and business lives almost merge into one with the sort of home working. From an attacker's point of view, if I can gain intelligence about FC's personal life, that's a whole new sort of information pot about him that I could use to tailor attacks. And I think it's part of it's understanding the risk, but also sort of helping move people on that cyber journey of upskilling and empowering people at the end of the day of, okay, we have this remote working. That means security has changed. You are part of that security solution. And basically having them sort of take more ownership with that. The way I always like to view it is our mission should be to empower the people while having safety nets underneath them because people do make mistakes at the end of the day. So I think it's a very fine balancing act, and it goes back to what is our operational risk, and that shouldn't just be a blanket approach. If you have certain individuals that need more assistance, more security constraints because of the nature of their work, nature of their clients, it's important to understand what works for the individual and the department at the same time. Don't know, FC or Lillian, if you've got anything to add to that one.
Yeah, I'll see if Lillian wants to say anything first.
Not really.
Okay. All right. So the really interesting thing is, right, is everything that Jack just said, I completely agree, except that's how it always was. People just didn't realize it. They were already part of that security culture. They just weren't aware of it. They kind of left everything at the office and went home. They didn't think about security of their company when they weren't at home. Now they are. Now they're being forced to do that. And it's really funny that Jack mentioned, like, you know, if you find out a bit more about a person in their life and sort of their home life, you can utilize that a little bit more. It's exactly what we've been doing for years, right? Whenever we do, evaluations against a high net worth client or a business, we will look at the personal lives of the key people there, right? So, you know, I'll be digging through the bins of a head of some huge corporative bank to find out where their kids go to school so that I can plan out a kidnapping of the children so that you could then be like, okay, look, if we got your children, you are going to give us the keys to your kingdom. And so those high net worth individuals started to understand, actually, my personal life is part of the business, whether or not I want it to be or not. And now it's moving into more of those people that are, you know, sort of day-to-day taskers, because if you get in and sort of, you know, circumvent their security controls and you get into their house and you sort of threaten their friends or family or their sort of loved ones, they are going to give you a way into that corporate environment if you needed it.
That was more than a little chilling there, FC.
Yeah.
You're kidnapped now. Sorry.
But that's the reality of the situation that we are in, right? So criminal organizational gangs, the big gangs, the organized criminals will do absolutely horrific things against people to gain access to vast amounts of money. I've worked against, many cartels from South America that I won't even explain some of the stuff that they do, but it is horrific. And you have to face the reality of, if you are dealing with vast amounts of money, people will come after it, and they will come after it hard, and they won't give any scruples about, oh, well, these people are living at home, we shouldn't do that. No, they're criminals. They break the law. They're going to do horrible things. You just have to be ready for that sort of thing.
And since data is money, coming after data can be just as powerful. So
exactly.
Lillian first, and then we'll go to Jack.
I do remember now kind of what I wanted to say, and it's almost the opposite, sort of, the pushback in a way, is that I think law firms especially have to think about their own duties in this, right? I mean, we're not South America. We do have quite strong data protection laws, for good or for bad. And we also have health and safety laws, actually. And there's been a lot of debate about this during the pandemic, about what happens to these obligations when people aren't convenient in the office anymore, but are at home, possibly using their own devices, their own mobile phones, et cetera, and the duties don't disappear, right? So law firms particularly should be thinking about things like data minimization. What data do they need to hold about their employees? Is it sensitive personal data? Have they got the right kind of consents or lawful basis for processing? Should they be retaining this data, right? Is it data that's been sitting there for 20 years and is no longer relevant, might be out of date, might, as you say, be used for phishing? You shouldn't be, apathetic about this and then just put it down as a security risk afterwards. It is also a question of your duties as an employer and as a data controller to your employees. And I think that's quite a serious issue in terms of mutual trust, as well as security and breach risks. And the other thing I'd add, right, is again, if you are planning on upskilling your home workers, then give them support, right? And I speak as someone here in an industry which is higher education, where I really don't think there's been a lot of support. If you want them to use two-factor and multi-factor authentication properly, if you want them to use password managers, if you don't want them to use the same password across everything, including, their Facebook account and their work account, then give them support, right? Don't just expect it to happen.
Okay, Jack?
Yeah, I'd like to sort of first thank FC, because he's entirely correct of you target the person when you're attacking someone. I think the angle I was more bringing in there is from a employee's point of view, the lines have now blurred, where I think it's okay to use company assets for personal reasons and those pieces as well as. But I think it really is the case of, in how we're all adapting, attackers have adapted as well. I think Lillian, you said earlier, and I know you did as well, FC, around news-driven attacks, where in less than 12 hours from an event, whatever's on BBC, we'll see attacks being people trying to be socially engineered with those. And I think it's just that recognition, sort of training and policies and all of those other great things we've talked about need to keep up to date with. And it unfortunately makes our jobs a lot harder. The attackers keep changing their methods. It might be the same base technology of manipulation. Like, manipulation's been around thousands of years. I'd bet quite happily it's going to be around for thousands more, because people are bad. There's bad people out there and we need to stop them. However, it's understanding, and this is where it almost goes down to a personal basis. What are your core risks? What are people likely to be after? And sort of once you've identified that, you can almost work backwards as a sanity check. So Vivia's question earlier of, if you have limited resources, what should you do? And it's identified not only, as FC took through the crown jewel piece, but what's the biggest gate? Where's the biggest door to your business? And start there.
Okay.
Well, I think the corollary to that is, you may not know. You're a law firm. You're really good at law, right? It doesn't mean you're really good at security. Get someone, anyone, even if it's one of our worst competitors that we think is shit, then that is probably a better, way forward. Get someone that knows what they're talking about to do it. I wouldn't try and stand up in court and defend myself in a murder charge. I would get a lawyer to do it. You can't expect a lawyer to go, actually, I'll start taking on all of the security stuff as well. Get an expert in, get some advice.
I think that's a really good piece for everything we're talking about today, is identifying the things you do know and the things you don't. And then, like all things, get advice on those. I think that's a really good point.
And I think that also goes to training. We're talking about empowering employees, and we've talked briefly before about, training of employees. What different types of things are we having to train the employees on when they're at home? I'll give you one example: understanding who's on their Wi-Fi and how to partition their routers. We looked at all the different companies, as many different companies as we can, and say, this is how you partition your routers when you're at home. So what other kinds of things should we be adding to this at-home training, this training from employees at home that they wouldn't need to be doing in the office?
I think the most important thing with that is, why should they care? Like, they're not security experts. It's not their day job. Their day job is to put patents in or do different cases. So I think, especially with this new hybrid working, it's almost a good opportunity to sort of rebalance of, this is security, this is how it's going to impact you personally. This is why we're here to work with you on that, because if this goes wrong, it's not just the firm that's going to suffer, it's individuals that suffer at the end of the day. In terms of more specific training, I think that goes down to where individuals are on their cyber journey. It's pointless going in with an advanced training course for individuals who are really struggling to understand what a firewall is, or why do they need multi-factor authentication. So I know personally I'm quite against sort of broad brushes in that, and that's where almost the evaluation of where we are as a firm, but more importantly where we are as people within that firm.
Okay, one last question on the employee training side of it. Something I advocate for, and I'm wondering whether you guys are for this or against this, is the no blame culture. When somebody does think they've done something, they've clicked on a phishing thing, an attack, that the firm doesn't immediately go, okay, you're out of here, you're fired, so that there's that chilling of that information. So what are your thoughts on that?
I know personally, I think it's a fantastic piece. Even if you take out, just look at it from a very logical point of view, bad things will happen regardless of how many defenses and mitigations you have. It's all a statistics game. However, if someone will come forward in the first minute, the first 5 minutes of saying, I think I've done something wrong here, the damage that could possibly cause can be mitigated greatly. You can get ahead of the curve and hopefully reduce the impact to your organization. If you have a fear culture where, I think I might be fired because I've clicked on a phishing link, I'm not going to share that because I don't want to lose my job. I'm going to keep quiet and hope I get away with it. And then suddenly the attacker has a much wider window to do whatever they like within your organization, and they can move within it without that initial human reporting. So I think it's really, I'm a big advocate for that.
Does anyone have anything to say against that?
Well, I'm just interested, again, more or less as a punter, because I've worked in a variety of, semi-large institutions, I suppose, where it's been very much impressed on you that failure to follow the security rules was a disciplinary offense, right? So that's what you're saying about making people take it seriously. But obviously that's the opposite of this approach of wanting you to share information on breaches as fast as possible. It sounds pretty sensible to me, but I think you'll find that, at least, I don't know for small startup-y places, but for large institutions, I think it's very, very common to get trained up that, this is going to be a disciplinary offense. And the other thing I was going to say is that, so in semi-large to large institutions, there seems to be a culture now of throwing a lot of automated security training videos at you, which you have to work through, and it sends you 94 emails saying you haven't completed this yet, which no one has, because they have to do all the real stuff. They have to do fee earning and so forth. And yet there's never any follow-up on this, never, in my experience, in appraisals or anything like that, team training, anything. So I think this whole culture needs examined, actually. And again, this is probably a very different story for like a small law firm than a big, Pricewaterhouse type institution.
Yeah, and I think you actually know that this is the feedback we get from firms where they say, well, if we don't discipline somebody who's done that, then they won't take it seriously. So they don't, they push back if there's no blame culture by saying, well, if we don't, and that culture, they don't see the other side of it. It's difficult to get them to see it. So it is thing. Well, while we're on you, Lillian, we're actually going to go into our last topic, which is almost futuristic topic, which is about deep fakes and how they have been growing over the years. If you couldn't tell by the accent, I'm from the US, and we dealt with some deep fakes back in some previous elections recently. And we are seeing a rise of them during the invasion of Ukraine and what's going on with the propaganda wars there. So can you tell us a little bit about what deep fakes are, and then we can talk about how they are entering into the phishing sphere?
Yeah. So deep fakes are manipulated media, right? And we've always had that. It was easy enough to do some of that with Photoshop, but nowadays deep fakes often refers to faked video, text, or audio, often made with the help of machine learning. I won't call it AI, such as GANs, generative adversarial networks. And this is enabling us to produce very, very high quality deepfakes, much more than we've seen before, just using kind of manual video editing techniques. And of course, the other feature we're seeing is there is a lot of software out there now, just as there is for phishing and denial of service and so forth, that is like, do it as a service. It makes it very, very easy for someone who's not technically brilliant to make these things now. So one thing we saw a few years ago, I think just before the pandemic, was the app Deep Nude that let you take the clothes off a picture of a woman, almost invariably a woman, to create a pornographic picture, right? And anyone could do this. It was made as a joke by some computing science students, as these things often are, and then released out into the wild, so people can do what used to be quite a skilled bit of manipulation just like that. And the other factor that we've seen, obviously, is how quickly these things can now be disseminated, right? Like all forms of fake news or scam, via platforms, via social media, and so forth and so on. So yeah, if I go on to talk about it in the kind of phishing context, we've heard a lot about deep fakes in the media over the last 2-3 years, 4 years, mainly in two contexts, which are fake news in politics, so President Trump, etc., and also in the context of porn, because about 95% of deepfake videos or more are generally estimated to be created, manipulated, reconstructed porn, often to take vengeance, again, on women, I'm afraid. So revenge porn, non-consensual use of intimate images. But there are more financially oriented versions that are now coming up, so it's everything from, creating fake videos of atrocities to maybe try to create, part of a general sort of gestalt, really, of doing fake charity appeals, say. I've seen that. There is sextortion, which, one hopes law firms don't get involved in, but they might, where you see a fake video involving a woman and they ask you, so it's another form of ransomware. But there's two other types that I thought might be worth mentioning that, are very much sort of on the horizon, and we've already got examples of that law firms probably would be worried about a lot. One is particularly using fake audio, which is much easier to do really convincingly, to pretend that it's, say, your CEO or your CTO or your accountancy manager, something like that, telling you to make a sale or transfer assets or whatever. And there's been some really, really scary examples of that. So there was one involving a UK company where a £230,000 transfer was scammed out of them to Hungary by a deep fake audio of their CEO, right? So you have to think about how would your security protocols deal with that? Because again, audio kind of evades some of these two-factor authentication password issues. It's just a call, right? And the other one that I think is terribly interesting, and which is just coming over the horizon, really, I've been talking about for years, is fake court evidence. So particularly, the financial stuff is where the big money will be, but the human damage of something like a child custody case, right, which get very, very heated. If it's very easy to fake, what sounds like, say, a call in which, let's say the dad sounds drunken or abusive or threatening. And that has already happened in a case, again, involving a UK firm and a Dubai-based father. It appears, you never quite know in these stories, right? But it appears that audio was deep faked to make it sound indeed like he was threatening and abusive, so that he would lose the custody case. And I have been thinking for a long time that this kind of almost, you don't want to call small level, but this kind of small level evidence in things like family cases or minor criminal offences, maybe parking offences, that we would see an explosion of deepfake evidence. And that is incredibly difficult for the legal system, I think, because not only are lawyers not trained to recognise this stuff, but neither are judges, so it's like a tabula rasa for things to go bad.
All right. Okay. Maybe we can hear from our ethical hacker and see what he has to say about this.
Yeah, I think, it is quite likely that we're going to see more and more of these attacks. We're already seeing it in the wild, as Lillian said. Like, the case that springs to mind is the mother of a cheerleader who created deep fakes of the cheerleading team rivals and put them out in order to do whatever it was she was trying to do. It's in the hands not of just criminals but just the general public now. It's incredibly powerful. I haven't seen that many great uses of it, and by great I mean like high quality decent works of it. I've seen some interestingly detailed, like Tom Cruise type spoofing, which is quite good. But the recent one that they did against the Ukrainian president, that looked terrible. And this is the point, like, criminals will always do the least amount of work, right? So doing high quality stuff is actually quite tricky. There was an attack several years ago against the French president where they actually made a silicon mask. Instead of doing all the deepfake, silicon mask of this guy, and they sort of had a bad connection and made it all fuzzy and blurry, so it wasn't too good, and did like a Zoom call with just trying to scam out money. Criminals will always be lazy, right? Because they don't want to put in a lot of effort. They want to put in the bare minimum effort to get the result they need. So at the moment, it's not worth their time or effort to do it, but we are going to see that coming up.
Yeah, and I'll just add on to that's why I think these audio fakes are very interesting, because we know that technology of producing voice clones is if not here, then absolutely on the horizon. I mean, we already have things like Google Assistant. I can't quite recall if that's in fact being rolled out in the UK, but it certainly has in the US, that will clone your voice to like ring up and make a dentist appointment or a hair appointment or something. There is absolutely no reason why that couldn't be grabbed and used to, defraud your employees or your creditors or whatever. So this is just much easier to do convincingly than deepfake vid, which, as you say, takes real money and expertise to produce a really good one. But on that, I would also say that there's been quite a lot of large-scale experiments lately, one by MIT, one by the Royal Society, etc., in which they ask ordinary people to tell the difference between deepfakes and not deepfakes, particularly involving less famous people than like Trump or Zelensky, right? And they're about half and half. We're really bad at telling these things, so maybe that's another training area. But I actually personally think, however much you tell people to look at the shadows of the eyes or the glasses, or does it look like lifelike hair, that people will not really notice. Frankly, people aren't actually very good at that. We are, again, very easily socially engineered.
And that comes back to the end. The fact is, people shouldn't be the last line of defense. Like, if they do get through that, then there should be more checks and measures along the way to prevent whatever it is they're trying. Audio deepfakes are here. We actually use them, because a lot of these tools, they do have a good use in the end, right? That's what they're kind of being made for. We use deepfake audio to fill in gaps, or to do overlays of audio of me talking over videos. Thankfully, I'm not a deep fake today, but we do use it internally here.
How would we know?
Well, it depends if if I glitch.
I can tell you your video has been a little glitchy today.
You could easily be a deep fake.
Only I
That's
could do.
actually something I wanted to ask. I mean, I was thinking about this, you know, again, more or less as a punter, is that we do have a lot of checks. I mean, obviously, like you say, you can mitigate the damage once it's happened. But in terms of prevention, we do obviously have a lot of checks for our conventional electronic intersections, right? We do have multi-factor authentication. We do have passwords. We do have restricted access to certain files, whatever. But we have nothing on personal audio interaction, right? I mean, you know, Priti Patel and what the other minister have just been scammed like this. Should we be having something like James Bond passwords, you know, where I say to you, you know, the birds are flying at night and you go, but the cat has killed them or something. I mean, how are we going to deal with this?
That's for an entirely new webinar, I think. We're coming close to the end, so I just wanted to have each one of you maybe give us just one last point to help our audience, saying, okay, here's the one thing that you can do to help. So like one helpful hint, and I'll start with you, Lillian, since you're on screen. Here's one last helpful hint.
I think I'll, from personal grief, say the one I already did, which is please train your staff to use two-factor and multi-factor authentication, and don't assume that everyone working at home has their phone glued to their side, because it's not a corporate environment.
Okay, great. FC, I can't wait to hear what this is.
I would go with get advice. Get some expert opinion, someone to help you with all of this.
Okay, great. Are there any criteria to look for so they don't end up with your horrible competitor?
No, I'm not here to sell anything. I'm not here to sell us. I'm just saying, Google security consultancy, pick out some good ones, have a chat with them. You'll soon work out whether or not they're probably bullshit artists or not. You know, you can try to just speak to them a little bit and ask them some questions, see what they say.
Or say if they start telling you a lot of buzzwords and terms, just
exactly, yeah,
and if they don't make sense, then you go back to them again. Never mind.
Yeah,
They try and blind you with your science. Okay, and last but not least, again, Jack Chapman.
For me, I think it's sort of just take a moment to sort of reevaluate with 2022, sort of where we are from a risk point of view. So if I really look at how we're blending together that sort of human element, the technical element, and the policy element into a real layered approach. And to FC's point is it never hurts to reach out and ask for help, if it's either through a professional, but also what other firms are doing as well.
Okay, great. We did have a question come in this last minute, but I'm not sure if we have time to answer that in the time frame. So maybe we can find out who that's from and we can give them some feedback afterwards. It's been a great discussion today, and thank you all for joining us on the panel, and thank you all from the audience for joining us. I just have some last notes. As I said, it's been great, but this has been produced by Legal Tech Talks. I'm going to read this because I know I'm going to forget something, and I want to make sure I do this. If you want all your Legal Tech Talk news, please go to the NetLaw Media website. The next one up for Global Legal Tech Talks is going to be with a colleague of ours. I've worked with him before and spoken on panels with him, is Professor Richard Susskind. Always good information from him, and he will be discussing and exploring legal tech in Spain. So that should be good. Looking forward to that. All right, thank you very much.